Dating him was a dare. I regretted it instantly. Chapter 1. The Funeral Fling. You want to hear about the ultimate relationship implosion? The one that nuked my entire social life? My name's Jessica, I'm 24, and honestly I still can't quite grasp how it all went down. I'm sitting here playing it over in my head and I'm just, whatever. Let everyone else think what they want. This whole spectacular mess, of all places, kicked off at a funeral. My friend needed moral support. Her uncle had died and she just couldn't face the family circus alone. I wasn't even supposed to be there, right? But I'm a loyal friend, so I went. Funerals are weird anyway. Everyone's putting on a show of grief, but half the crowd barely knew the deceased. I was standing there, suffocating in a stuffy room filled with people performing sorrow when I saw him. This guy was actually smiling. Not in a creepy way, but genuinely engaged in a normal conversation, looking like a living, breathing human instead of a grief-stricken zombie. So, I did what any rational person wouldn't. I walked over and blurted out a joke about whether he was the one who put the guy in the casket. I know, totally inappropriate. But honestly, life's too short to pretend everything's sacred all the time. Most guys would have recoiled in horror, or at least squirmed uncomfortably. But Oliver, that's his name, he laughed. A real, genuine belly laugh, not that fake polite chuckle guys use when they're trying to be nice. We ended up talking for hours about everything except death and family drama. When he asked for my number at the end, I gave it to him. Why not? He seemed harmless enough and I was morbidly curious. He definitely wasn't my usual type. I typically gravitated towards guys who were, well, exciting. Oliver was just a regular guy, steady job, way too interested in asking me questions about myself. But there was something strangely refreshing about how he actually listened when I talked instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. Our first coffee date was surprisingly nice. He picked a charming little spot downtown, not trying too hard to be trendy, and we just talked for 3 hours straight. He remembered details I'd casually mentioned at the funeral about my work and family, which was utterly bizarre. Guys never pay attention like that. I found myself genuinely looking forward to his texts, planning my outfits for our next meeting. Caught me off guard. This was supposed to be casual, a placeholder. Oliver treated me differently. He wasn't glued to his phone, wasn't trying to impress me with endless stories about himself. He'd bring me coffee when I mentioned a rough day. He actually wanted to do normal couple stuff, grocery shopping, watching movies on the couch. It was comfortable in a way I wasn't used to, but also, in a strange twist, a bit boring. I kept waiting for him to do something, anything, that would give me a reason to lose interest. But he just kept being relentlessly, consistently nice. Chapter 2. The Practice Boyfriend Dare. After a few weeks, I started telling my friends about him. Or rather, sort of telling them. I mentioned I was seeing someone new, but I kept the details vague. I knew what Stacy and Tiffany would say. They have very specific, very loud opinions about the kind of guys I should be dating, and Oliver absolutely did not fit their mold. They're the type who believe relationships should be a whirlwind of constant drama and excitement. They would never understand why I was wasting my time with someone so normal. But I kept seeing him anyway. Honestly, it was just easy. Oliver never played games. He never made me second-guess how he felt. If he said he'd call, he called. If we made plans, he showed up. It was the first relationship where I wasn't endlessly dissecting every text, wondering if he was losing interest. For once, I could just relax and enjoy spending time with someone, free from the usual stress and uncertainty that came with dating. The only problem was that little voice in my head, a persistent whisper reminding me this wasn't supposed to be serious. Oliver was a placeholder, a temporary distraction until someone more exciting came along. But weeks bled into a month and I still couldn't bring myself to end it. I started making excuses. He was convenient, the timing was perfect, he was helping me get over my last breakup. Anything but admitting that I actually enjoyed his company, that I looked forward to seeing him. What really got to me was Oliver's genuine happiness whenever we were together. He'd light up when I walked into a room. He had this way of making me feel like I was the most interesting person he'd ever met. It was flattering but also overwhelming because I wasn't used to being someone's priority like that. Most of my relationships had been about the chase, the thrill of the unknown. With Oliver, I always knew exactly where I stood. And surprisingly, that felt really, really good. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was settling. Oliver was great, but was he truly the guy I wanted to introduce to my friends and family? Was this the relationship I wanted to post about on social media? I kept comparing him to my exes, wondering if I was just getting comfortable because it was easy, not because it was right. The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I couldn't bring myself to end things. I didn't want to dive back into the dating scene and all its games. So, I just let it ride, telling myself I'd figure out what I really wanted eventually. Oliver seemed happy. I was mostly happy. And it wasn't hurting anyone to just see where things went. I had no idea that my friends were about to morph this entire situation into something completely different, or that my inability to make a decision would ignite the biggest disaster of my life. How could I have known that being happy with someone who wasn't my usual type would somehow become this massive, controversial thing? Chapter 3, The Experiment Begins. When Stacy and Tiffany finally met Oliver, everything changed. I'd been stalling on the introduction, knowing their judgmental tendencies. But after about 6 weeks, it just got too weird that they hadn't. So, I invited them for drinks with us one Friday night, foolishly thinking that if they saw how happy I was, they'd understand why I was with him. What a profound mistake. The entire night, I could see them exchanging glances, barely stifling their smirks whenever Oliver spoke. He was being his usual sweet, attentive self, asking them about their jobs, genuinely listening. But I could tell they thought he was trying too hard. The moment he went to get another round of drinks, Stacy leaned in, her voice dripping with disdain. "What are you doing with that guy?" Tiffany chimed in, asking if I was feeling okay because Oliver was so not your type. I got defensive, muttering about how nice he was, how well he treated me. They just laughed. Stacy quipped that nice doesn't make up for boring, and Tiffany added she could see me getting bored within a month. They kept pushing, dissecting my choices, questioning if I was truly attracted to him or just settling because I was tired of dating jerks. The more they questioned, the more I started to doubt myself. That's when Stacy, in a stroke of what she deemed genius, came up with her brilliant idea. She suggested I think of Oliver as practice. Like I could learn how to be in a stable relationship with someone safe before graduating to someone more exciting. She said it would be good for me to experience what it's like to be with a guy who actually cares, even if he wasn't the one. Tiffany found this hilarious, christening it my training wheels relationship. At first, I snapped back, telling them they were being mean, that Oliver didn't deserve to be talked about like that. But they pressed, insisting they were just looking out for me, didn't want to see me waste my time. They pointed out I hadn't posted any pictures of us on social media, true, asking if I was embarrassed to be seen with him. They argued that my hesitation to defend him proved I knew, deep down, he wasn't right for me. By the end of the night, they had utterly convinced me to frame my relationship with Oliver as a temporary experiment. Not exactly a joke, but certainly not serious. They dared me to keep dating him for a few more weeks, just to see how long I could make it work with someone so different from my usual type. They spun it as a personal growth challenge. Could I appreciate a nice guy, even if he wasn't exciting? They made it sound like I'd be doing myself a favor by exploring this different kind of relationship. I agreed to their stupid dare. What? Because honestly, it gave me permission to keep doing what I was already doing, without having to make any real decisions about the future. If this was just an experiment, then I didn't have to worry about whether Oliver was the one. I could just enjoy the relationship for what it was, free from the pressure of figuring out where it was going long term. But agreeing to frame it as a dare changed something inside my head. Suddenly, every sweet thing Oliver did felt like evidence of how different we were rather than how compatible. When he'd text me good morning every day instead of thinking it was cute, I'd picture my friends rolling their eyes at his predictability. When he'd plan thoughtful dates, I'd wonder if he was trying too hard to impress me because he knew he wasn't my usual type. The worst part was I started keeping mental notes of things to tell Stacy and Tiffany later. Oliver's earnestness, which I'd initially found charming, became something to laugh about with my friends. His genuine interest in my life morphed into clinginess in my retellings. I was living a double life, genuinely happy with Oliver when we were together, but also meticulously collecting material to prove to my friends that this wasn't real. Chapter 4, The Double Life. What was supposed to be a few weeks stretched into months. Because honestly, I didn't want it to end. Oliver kept being this incredible boyfriend, making me feel valued and cared for in ways I'd never experienced before. But I couldn't admit that to my friends. They had already decided he was just my practice boyfriend, and I was too proud to walk back the narrative I'd created. So, I kept making excuses for why I hadn't ended things. The timing wasn't right. He was going through a stressful period at work. I didn't want to hurt his feelings right before a big family event he'd invited me to. The truth was I was falling for him. But I'd built this entire narrative with my friends about how this was temporary, and I didn't know how to dismantle it without looking like an idiot. So, I just kept going, telling myself I'd figure it out eventually, while secretly hoping I could have it both ways, keep Oliver and keep my friends' respect. 8 months in, Oliver and I were, in every meaningful way, a real couple. I had clothes at his place. We spent most weekends together. We'd met each other's families. His mom adored me, which was a first. Usually, the mothers of guys I dated could sense my non-committal intentions. But Oliver's family treated me like I was already part of theirs, and it felt genuinely good, even as it deepened my guilt. The problem persisted. I still couldn't bring myself to be honest with Stacy and Tiffany. Every time they asked about the experiment, I'd deflect or make jokes about how Oliver was fine for now, but obviously not long-term material. I'd even invent imaginary problems in our relationship just to maintain the facade that this was still temporary. I told them he was getting too serious too fast, that he was boring compared to my usual types, that I was starting to feel trapped by his expectations. None of it was true. Oliver wasn't pushing for anything I wasn't ready for. Our relationship was, in fact, the least dramatic one I'd ever been in. But admitting that would mean admitting my friends had been wrong about him. And it would also mean admitting that I'd been lying to them for months about how I truly felt. I was too deep in the fake narrative to back out now. Meanwhile, Oliver was clearly all in. He'd started talking about future plans. A vacation together, maybe even moving in. He introduced me to all his friends and coworkers, talking about me like I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. The way he looked at me made me feel beautiful, important, and loved in a way I'd never experienced. But instead of simply basking in that, I kept hearing my friends' voices, questioning whether I was really attracted to him or just getting comfortable. They'd planted these insidious seeds of doubt that blossomed every time Oliver did something particularly sweet or earnest. I started scrutinizing our physical chemistry, wondering if I was settling for emotional compatibility over passion. I compared our relationship to movies and TV shows, questioning if what we had was real love, or just a really good friendship with benefits. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. I genuinely cared about Oliver and loved spending time with him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was supposed to want something more exciting. My friends had convinced me that being happy and comfortable meant I was settling, and that I owed it to myself to hold out for someone who gave me butterflies and kept me on my toes. But honestly, I was tired of butterflies and drama. I liked knowing Oliver would be there when he said he would. I liked that he cared about my day and remembered things that were important to me. Still, I couldn't bring myself to defend our relationship to my friends or post about it on social media the way I had with previous boyfriends. I kept Oliver separate from the rest of my life because I was afraid of what people would think. I was embarrassed that I'd ended up with someone so different from my usual type. Even though that difference was actually what made our relationship work so well, I was more worried about maintaining my image than protecting something good I'd found. Looking back, I can see how completely messed up that was. But at the time, it felt like I was just being realistic about our differences. I told myself that loving someone didn't mean you had to broadcast it to the world, and that keeping things private was actually more mature. But really, I was just being a coward who cared more about what other people thought than about being honest with the person I was supposedly in love with. Chapter 5. The Catastrophe and Its Aftermath. The whole thing came crashing down on a random Tuesday. I got home from work early feeling utterly overwhelmed. Oliver had been talking more seriously about our future, mentioning things like meeting my extended family and planning a weekend trip for our 1-year anniversary. Meanwhile, my friends had been getting more persistent about asking when I was going to graduate, to someone more my speed. I felt pulled in a million different directions and I couldn't handle it anymore. So, I called Stacy, finally intending to tell her the truth about how I felt about Oliver. I was going to admit that the dare had turned into something real, that I actually loved him. But when she picked up, immediately launching into her usual jokes about my practice boyfriend, and asking when I was going to find someone more exciting, I just couldn't do it. Instead of defending Oliver or being honest about my feelings, I found myself falling back into her narrative. I said things like, I never meant for this to last so long, and I wouldn't normally date someone like him. I complained about how he was getting too comfortable, and taking our relationship for granted, which wasn't even true. I was just venting my frustration about feeling trapped between two worlds, but it came out sounding like I was still treating Oliver like a joke after 8 months together. I was so caught up in trying to maintain my image with Stacy that I didn't hear Oliver come home early from work. He must have heard me talking about how I never expected our relationship to go on this long and how he wasn't my usual type. From his perspective, it must have sounded like I'd been faking everything the entire time. When I finally realized he was standing there, listening, my heart simply stopped. The look on his face was something I'll never ever forget. It wasn't just hurt, it was complete devastation mixed with profound humiliation. He had just heard his girlfriend of 8 months talking about him like he was some kind of charity case or a social experiment. He asked me to explain what he had just heard. I tried to backtrack to tell him how my feelings had changed and become real over time, but the damage was already done. How do you explain to someone that you started dating them as a dare without making it worse? How do you convince someone your love is real when they just heard you talking about them like they were temporary? Oliver didn't want to hear about how my feelings had evolved. He wanted to know why I was still talking about him dismissively to my friends after 8 months of what he thought was a genuine relationship. He said that even if my feelings had become real at some point, the very foundation of our entire relationship was built on lies and mockery. He pointed out that I'd just been on the phone talking about him like he was still a joke, which proved that deep down I still saw him that way. When I tried to argue that what he heard wasn't the whole truth, he asked me if I'd ever defended him to my friends, or if I'd always just gone along with their criticism. I couldn't answer honestly. The painful truth was I'd never once stood up for him or our relationship when my friends made their comments. I'd always chosen maintaining my image over protecting his feelings. And now he knew it. He told me he felt humiliated and completely betrayed. Not just by how our relationship started, but by the fact that I'd been living a double life for months, pretending to care about him while secretly agreeing with people who thought he wasn't good enough for me. Oliver moved his stuff out over the next few days. I kept expecting him to calm down, to want to work things out once he'd had time to process everything. I thought if I could just explain how confused I'd been and how real my feelings had become, he'd understand and forgive me. But he was done. He said he couldn't trust anything about our relationship because he didn't know what had been genuine and what had been part of the joke. When I tried to contact him after he moved out, he told me he needed space and asked me not to call or text anymore. He said he needed time to figure out how much of what we'd shared had been real, and that hearing from me was just making it harder for him to move on. That's when it truly hit me: he wasn't coming back. I had lost him and it was entirely my own fault. Chapter 6: The Bitter Lesson. My friends, Stacy and Tiffany, were initially supportive, saying I was better off without him anyway. They insisted this proved he wasn't right for me if he couldn't handle the truth about how we got together. But when I started genuinely grieving the relationship, when I talked about how much I missed him, they got annoyed. My drama, over what they still saw as just some random guy I'd been messing around with, clearly bothered them. That's when the bitter realization hit me: they had never actually been my friends. They were just mean girls who enjoyed having someone to be catty with. They didn't care about my happiness. They just wanted to maintain their sense of superiority by putting down anyone who didn't meet their standards. When I needed actual support and understanding, they had nothing to offer except more criticism and judgment. 6 months later, I found out through mutual acquaintances that Oliver was dating someone new. Her name's Sarah. And from what I could see on social media, she seemed like exactly the kind of person who would appreciate everything good about him. They looked genuinely happy together, in a way that was completely different from the performative relationship posts I used to make with other guys. Seeing them together finally made me realize what I'd lost. Oliver had given me the kind of love and stability that most people spend their entire lives looking for. And I'd thrown it away because I was too worried about what other people thought. I'd been so focused on maintaining my image that I'd sacrificed the best relationship I'd ever had. The worst part was that the story of what I'd done started spreading through our social circles. Oliver had apparently told some people about how his ex-girlfriend had dated him as a dare. And word got around pretty quickly. People started looking at me differently, like I'd revealed something fundamentally ugly about my character. I lost several friendships when the story made its rounds, and guys I tried to date seemed wary of me once they heard what had happened. I tried to convince myself that everyone was overreacting, that Oliver was just being dramatic. I told myself he should have been grateful for the 8 months we had together, regardless of how it started. I mean, I'd given him the best relationship of his life up to that point, right? He should have focused on that instead of getting hung up on the details of how we got together. But deep down, I knew I'd messed up something good because I was too proud and too concerned with appearances to just be honest about what I wanted. I'd let my friends' opinions matter more than my own feelings. And I treated Oliver like he was disposable instead of recognizing how rare it was to find someone who loved me the way he did. Now I'm alone, having lost both the genuine relationship I'd found with Oliver and the shallow friendships I'd maintained with Stacy and Tiffany. I keep telling myself that Oliver was lucky to have had 8 months with me, and that I did nothing wrong by exploring a relationship with someone different from my usual type. But sometimes when I see him and Sarah together, looking so happy and natural, I wonder what would have happened if I'd just been brave enough to admit that sometimes the best things come in packages we don't expect. Whatever. Everyone else can think what they want about what happened. I know the truth about how I felt, even if I wasn't perfect at showing it. Maybe Oliver and I just weren't meant to be together long-term anyway, and all this drama just sped up the inevitable. At least I learned something about myself and what I want in a relationship, even if it cost me more than I thought it would. That's got to count for something, right?